Good evening, everyone. My name is Anna. I am the Local Studies Officer here at Randwick City Library, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's talk. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples who are the traditional custodians of the land where Randwick City Library is located. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians wherever each of us are located today. And now, without further delay, we are delighted to welcome esteemed author and researcher, Dr. Sue Rosen, as she discusses the fascinating history and heritage of ANZAC Parade.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that welcome, and thank you everybody for, I don't know if you call it tuning in for this talk on ANZAC Parade. I just want to say that on this opening screen here to the left, there's a still from a 8-minute film at the Australian War Memorial on the Engineers Camp at Moore Park. And that happens to be a still from them learning how to launch rafts on one of the lakes at Centennial Park. It's really worth while watching, and I recommend it highly to you. We'll have the reference to that up on the screen sometime later. Okay. Now, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the study. I was initially commissioned in 2020 to do a heritage assessment of ANZAC Parade, and Council had resolved to follow up on promises made in 1917 to create ANZAC Parade as a memorial corridor, a grand vision. And so this has been reactivated recently, part of the Council's Vision 2040 strategic plan. Now, the project was quite different to many others in that community consultation was at the core, from the very outset, in the middle, the end and beyond. I'm still talking to people about it. Margaret Hope from the Daughters of ANZAC, Robert and John Muscat from the New South Wales Military History Society, Stacey Wilson at National Parks and Wildlife, and Sergeant Peter Ryan at the Military History Museum at Victoria Barracks were important contributors. And we hope to access many more as COVID abates. Council did circularise a broad range in the community, but there was limited response, presumably because of the chaos that was, in train at that time. I'll just, sorry, I want to just go back here. Now, and also I wanted to acknowledge the Historical Society and Local Studies and the archives here at Randwick and at the City of Sydney. They were very important resources. And thank you especially too to Georgina Keep and Ben Arnfield at the City of Sydney. Okay, to the next slide. So the route, I've summarised it there, which I'm sure you can all read for yourselves. The important thing about the route is that it ranges, obviously north to south, bisects the LGA, and the route evolved from the natural topography. Basically, Randwick was swampy, sandy terrain, and they took the route has evolved out of the path of least resistance, the one that you're less likely to get bogged on, and it followed the ridge lines. It's moved around and varied across time, and it's had many names. It was originally the road to Botany Bay, then Old Botany Road, Randwick Road, Moore Park Road, and from 1917 ANZAC Parade. The current ANZAC Parade includes parts of, or former sections of Eastern Avenue, Bunurong Road, Broad Road, Tramway Crescent, and Lawn and Cornby Avenues. And while it now links Moore Park to La Perouse, the route really originally ran to Old Southhead Road, which was later renamed Oxford Street. And in some ways, that's quite a natural finish there up at Taylor Square. Now, the commission was to undertake a heritage assessment And because these are often, heritage assessments are often skewed to the built environment, I was initially looking at the buildings along ANZAC Parade and was sort of quite confounded as to how I was going to tackle the task and create some kind of unity and from, you know, the buildings there that are clearly significant, but there's quite a few gaps. And but on the first day on the job, my fears were allayed when I met up with Margaret Hope, and soon after on a tour that Margaret took me on, and this was a tour of all the places that have some sort of military association scattered along the route to either side. And that she'd identified those, and as we explored them, others became apparent. And of course, there are sites along this route that are no longer there that were active in the 1700s, but these emerged over the course of the study. And it became apparent to me that the key to this project was to view ANZAC Parade as a cultural route, with a military themed cultural route. Now, although it's not the Silk Road, which is a trade themed route, it meets, in fact, all the definitions of the International Council of Monuments and Sites to qualify as a cultural route, which I think really should be developed in terms of how it's presented to the public and explored and interpreted. It's an incredibly rich and multifaceted way to approach thinking about ANZAC Parade. So here is a list of the military sites. There are two sorts of sites along the parade. So, and I would say, as a spine, these sites were associated with intense military activity from at least 1788 until the second half, until the second half of the, until the second half of the 20th century, with significant elements still functional today. So the sites range in character from those used for actual defence purposes, such as forts and batteries, others for recruitment and training, Victoria Barracks, the Centennial Parklands, the showground, rifle ranges and race courses. And then there are sites associated with rehabilitation and post-conflict welfare. So you've got the Randwick Military Hospital, and here we see on the slide here a wounded soldier being reunited with his family in 1914. And then there's also Daceyville, more known as a garden suburb, which it may well have started out as in 1912, but by 1915, 1916, war widows were moving in there, and when their men were returned from the front, they were also housed there. And also there's the Maroubra soldier settlement. So this story is fundamental to the history of the development of Randwick, its shape and character as a municipality, and no other place in Australia has such a powerful connection or so dense a number of connected sites. There's nowhere that I could find when I was looking around the country. And when I put this out for peer review, it was suggested to me that it's unlikely that there would be similar density anywhere in the former British Commonwealth, which is, quite sort of an amazing thought. So, see this picture here. I put this in. This is the showground, and these are all blokes lining up to get their cigarettes. I particularly like the fellow with the sunglasses. I think he looks really, really cool. It's quite funny. Okay. The other thing is too that you can look at ANZAC Parade itself as both a military site. There were soldiers marching up and down there and also straggling along there. But they did literally parade there, but they also used ANZAC Parade to take them from their encampments at, say, Randwick Racecourse or Moore Park, down to the rifle range at Long Bay, down for practice skirmishes around the sandhills at Daceyville. So it itself is a military site. And then, of course, the naming of ANZAC Parade in 1917, in the aftermath of Gallipoli, is a memorialisation in itself. So here we have, that's labelled, that's the Australian Expeditionary Force on their way to the ships in 1914. Now, the other sorts of sites are memorials, which I've got listed there. And the memorials are different in that they've been, and there's so many of them, and I'm sure I haven't got them all, that they've been established in response to community feeling, intense community feeling in the immediate aftermath of Gallipoli. And some of them weren't constructed until the 1960s, but you've got this enduring connection and feeling within the community about the sacrifices made across particularly the 20th century. But, you know, New South Wales troops were sent to the Sudan in 1885, and then there was the Boer War around 1900, 1903, World War I, World War II, and then, you know, of course, Korea, Vietnam, etc. So, there's plaques and the obelisk. There also memorialisation is also represented in the naming of streets. So around the Coral Sea Park, you've got the streets named New Orleans and the Chicago, and they're all named after American ships that fought in that battle. And then other streets recognise places and battles. So you've got Menin Road or Poitiers, and sort of military greats, generals like Byng and Patton and Knowles. And just driving here tonight to the library, I was constantly seeing military names that I recognised, and that is something that just is across the entire, all along the route, and we need to draw attention to that in some way. Okay. Now, the report goes into the history of some 25 places, and as I said, I think there'll be more. But in this talk, I'm going to have to be selective, but I'll provide an address to the full report that you can download at the end, and then you can get detail on all of these sites. So the first period that I thought I would just do some in-depth discussion of is one that I don't think is front of mind for most people when they think of ANZAC Parade, and that is the very first period of European entry or into this country. And I think we can go back to as early as 1770, when Cook sailed into Botany Bay. I think it was called Stingray Bay at that time. Now, in these images here, we can see possibly Cadigal or Dharawal people, Botany Bay people out on the water. And what is interesting is that Joseph Banks, who was on that expedition, talked about how the people ignored them and pretended that they just weren't there. But you can see the fellow in the middle there looking sort of quite, you know, he's a bit hunched over and he's giving a sideways glance. It's obvious that they were quite uncomfortable and probably even frightened. Now, that image is by Tupia, a Tahitian navigator and priest who joined Cook's expedition as a guide. And then we have another one. When they landed, Cook's party landed, and 30 to 40 people from that expedition went on shore on the southern side of Botany Bay, and they were opposed. It's recorded that they were opposed by two men, and it may well be these two characters here who were drawn by Sydney Parkinson, and they fired on them. they shot them, 30 to 40, and they shot at them. The people there, they fled, they abandoned the village, and they also left their spears behind, which wasn't probably a great idea because the Europeans took them. Then the other encounter that occurred then was that the local people ambushed the expedition surgeon and threw spears at him, but apparently he escaped unscathed. So, but these are the first recorded Aboriginal European military encounters in the general area, and some of the people involved would have been the Cadigal people. So I would like to investigate that further. There are undoubtedly Dharawal from the southern side, but we'd need to go through the diaries of those and the logs, to further investigate that. Then we skip 17. Oh no, just a moment. Sorry. Then we go 18 years ahead, and Philip, the first fleet, sail into Botany Bay, and then a few days later, La Perouse turns up, and La Perouse sets up camp. The British had gone around to Sydney Cove, and La Perouse set up a camp, and he constructed a stockade, a wooden palisaded stockade guarded by 2 small cannons at La Perouse. And there were a number of skirmishes that ensued between the French and the local people, and there were, firing, shots were exchanged, and there was spears were thrown. So these are military encounters. So turning now away from the French to talk about the British and their conflicts there, I've got 2 particular examples, but there are many more. I think it was in March or mid-1788, not long after they had arrived, Philip and a group went out accompanied by Marines. Oh, and the other thing, sorry, to say about the first fleet, it had with them the New South Wales Marine Corps as to defend them. So the first fleet just wasn't, the convicts, and it was a military expedition. So Philip goes looking for investigating the deaths of these 2 convicts, and they unexpectedly, his party, accompanied by a detachment of Marines, unexpectedly walked into a group of 300 armed Cadigal people. They think that was possibly near Little Bay. So I think there was a bit of shock, horror and alarm. And then Philip ordered the accompanying soldiers to, and this is a quote, to observe a close, well-connected, first of all, he ordered them to fix their bayonets and to observe a close, well-connected order of march, a classic military formation at the time. The next one, next incident I'd like to refer to is that Philip's gamekeeper, who was intensely disliked by the local Aboriginal people, was speared and killed. 50 Marines under Lieutenant Watkin Tench were sent out to Botany Bay to strike, quote, a decisive blow, to convince them of our superiority, and to infuse a universal terror. Now, Tench wasn't particularly enthusiastic about this. So they floundered around in the swamps down at the bay and came back without any captives. But the original instructions were that a number, I think up to 10, were to be hung and others decapitated in order to instill this universal terror. Really, in the face of superior firepower, the Aboriginal clans, they maintained a guerrilla campaign attacking Europeans opportunistically whenever they could. And that continued on for some time. But we never ever think about those incidences as being really our first military encounters here, but they were. Now, I want to skip ahead just to run through the development a bit more of ANZAC Parade. What became the Randwick LGA was really late to be occupied in terms of the European occupation of the area because it was so unsuited to agriculture. So the Cumberland Plain was occupied first, and then in 1811, the area's openness was preserved when Macquarie declared a 100-acre common which people could graze their livestock on, and then in 1820 he established a water reserve to the south of it. So it meant that Randwick had the space for parkland. It had it could have race and courses and golf courses and military facilities, and its shape has been it's been influenced by that to this day. Now, in 1817, a road was cut from Old Southhead Road to La Perouse, and then it occurred to them that the Botany Bay, it became to be seen as the back door to Sydney, ideal for smugglers and undesirables. And there were, if you brought goods into Port Jackson, you were up for customs fees and charges and the like. So Macquarie decided in the early 1820, around 1820, I think it was 1822, around then, to construct a fort. And in the background in this image that you can see there is the watchtower that was constructed at that time. It was actually only used for about 10 years, and then it had, in a military sense, then it had other uses. Then toward the end of that decade, the La Perouse monument was constructed, but that wasn't referring to any of his battles with the locals. It was about his achievements as a sailor and as an explorer and scientist. So now I want to skip to the 1840s with the construction of Victoria Barracks, which was constructed to accommodate 700 troops. That led quite crucially to the development of infrastructure that then expanded southward from there. The other thing you should note is look at all the sand. That's a bit of view of Moore Park. But when they described the area at that time as being quite inhospitable and unproductive, you can see why. Now, the Victoria Barracks, they were located on a ridge with a 360-degree views. They could view along Old Southhead Road and then, of course, down the road to Botany Bay. What was then established were military and civilian rifle ranges were constructed in the area, and there was a military cricket pitch and garden there. Now, these areas then became used. Moore Park, then, which wasn't Moore Park then, but that area started to be used as parade grounds, and these parades and military displays, they were major spectator events. As you can see in this picture, that's the 1877 Queen's Birthday Military Review in Moore Park. But they also did practice battles. So, and this range, Moore Park, Centennial Park and Queen's Park, the Centennial Parklands, they were used extensively for training and as headquarters and service depots and accommodation for service personnel. So some of these displays that happened at various jubilees and centenaries included in 1888, the Long Meadow in Centennial Park was used for the annual military review. In 1903, when the Japanese Naval Squadron of 3 ships visited Sydney, Centennial Park played host to a truly epic review, including both Australian and Japanese personnel. The spectacle performed before the Governor-General, dignitaries, and a densely packed crowd. It included a grand total of 4,099 officers and men, 386 horses, 12 guns, and 3 wagons. And then when the great fleet of the United States, of 16 United States naval vessels came into Sydney in August 1908, a review of some 12,000 Australian troops, cadets, and some naval personnel in Centennial Park made, as the Sydney Morning Herald observed, a magnificent sample of what Australia can do. So Centennial Park was used for drilling, reviews and parades, engineering exercises across the second half of the 20th century during both World Wars, with the lakes used to test bridges and pontoons. And peace celebrations were held there. And military reviews continued to be held even into the 20th century when Prince Edward visited in March 1920. And then in the sesquicentenary in 1938, a naval and military review was attended by 150,000 spectators. So in this image here, the next one, we've got a shot. This is great. This were the artillery horses training for the Sudan. So that's 1885. Can you imagine that? Just people, them tearing around like that. It's really quite extraordinary. So I'll just move on. I want to now move on to other military sites that that were intensively used. So we've really got the race courses. We've got Randwick, then we have, and here they are in 1914, but they were also camped there in the Boer War, preparing for that. So then we've got Kensington, and this is a view of their preparations in 1900. And then we've got Rosebery Racecourse, used both in World War I and World War II, and the Light Horse were assembled there. So then, the next slide is a current one of Newmarket, the old stables there, and that was a detention barracks during World War II for soldiers who had gone AWOL, I suppose. Then the next group of sites that I'd like to talk about are military forts and batteries. So Bear Island was constructed in the 1880s. The British troops left Australia, I think, in the 1870s, and there was a commission of what they should do, and some British military high flyers came out and recommended a system of forts around the harbour and along the coast. Bear Island was one of them. It wasn't used, and that meant too, by the way, that there were encampments on La Perouse headland, not only of soldiers, but cadets used to come out there for their couple of weeks training each year, and they also camped there. And I think the cable station was also used for training in perhaps World War II. Bear Island, eventually from 1912, it didn't have a great long military active career, but in 1912 they decided to use it as a veterans home. And from then until 1963, veterans from all across the British Commonwealth, including survivors of the Indian Mutiny and from the Sudan, they came here because they thought it'd be really nice for old military people to be able to retire in a fort, that they would feel really, really at home there. I think that's quite amusing. They moved them up, I think, to Narrabeen and to the big facility up there. Then we have Henry Head Battery, also constructed in the 1880s, and those guns were designed to keep large ships away. There's a huge, this really, that's just an observation post, what you can see there. There's a lot more to it. Then we have Cape Banks Battery that was constructed in the 1930s. And I understand from someone who's been down there that underneath there somewhere is a great big underground power station, complete with turbine hall, that was used to power the guns at the Cape Banks Battery. I'd love to see it. What's happening these days, I've heard, is that they're being used for raves and people are doing graffiti and the like there. The next one is of the Boora Point Battery, and I guess this is another observation post. And these are there, and some of them are all overgrown and are actually quite hazardous to poke around. You could easily fall down and break your neck. But and they're being let go to ruin. But something could be done with this, I feel like, to draw out, what this military, connection. They're quite amazing places. So next group that I'd like to look at are rifle ranges. Now, the rifle range ended up way down there at Long Bay, but initially it was up closer and partly in the grounds of the Randwick Barracks, I believe, where they also had a small arms training school there. But shooting and rifle ranges they were again spectator sports, and because from around 1910 every man, every boy had to join a citizen militia, and they had to do that until their mid-20s and go each week to do drills and march around and presumably do shooting practice. So here we have the Rifle Club in 1914 at Randwick. They're a pretty scraggly bunch. Not even all of them are in what resembles uniforms. And troops in training, when there was actually and the rifle range, sorry, had to keep getting moved from up near Moore Park because, and then from more central near the barracks and way down there, because stray shots used to go out and endanger, residents. There's quite a few articles in the Herald, people complaining about shots whizzing past them as they're putting the washing on the line. Okay, so, and then during war times, soldiers would be marched up and down there to go and practice. Oh, and here, this next image, this is the lunch break, and that is Daceyville. So the troops were practicing skirmishing, attacking each other, and they've all collapsed in a heap there. Presumably Daceyville got developed a few years later, that's 1914. So the next shot is of an encampment at Long Bay, where troops were just preparing and training, getting ready for embarkation, for overseas service. And this next shot is, that's a current aerial view of the Randwick Barracks. And the area there where you can see those great big rectangular slabs, they are, I believe, the footprint of great big, huge warehouses that were used by the Americans and the British, storing their supplies, for the Pacific Campaign. Part of one of those survives in the environmental park and is interpreted, as a historic relic. But that's quite amazing that those footprints are still there. And that site was active, from the 1860s and is still active now. Then the next sites are, say, associated with rehabilitation and welfare. Here we have the Randwick Rehabilitation Hospital in 1917. And there are Prince Henry Hospital was also used as a military hospital. There were the former Prince Henry parts of it were used. Then I've got the next image is of the obelisk. And I find this one particularly moving because this is the Returned Soldiers Fathers Association. And look at the age of those men. And, you know, they obviously would have lost their sons, you know, at Gallipoli, and probably by 1918 in France. It's a really wonderful photo. Okay, now moving on. There's lots of memorials. So on this map, you can see the Coral Sea Park, and on there you can see the different streets that are named, you know, after various ships. And then, of course, there's the Maroubra Memorial, which dates from the 1960s. And the next image is a plan from the Sydney City Council Archives. And this was the proposed remodelling of ANZAC Parade as a grand drive in 1926. And that's at the corner of Cleveland Street and ANZAC Parade. And look at those plantings and the vision that they had then. It's such a pity, really, that it, you know, it hasn't gone on. It hasn't continued. But maybe that's something like that can be developed. It certainly gets resurrected frequently enough. It seems to be a deep and perennial need. Okay, and just to summarise, to review, ANZAC Parade. Oh, and this is by the way, is Randwick Racecourse in 1943, where you can see all the tents and you know, I think there's trenches and all sorts of things there. So to reiterate, it's a cultural route, possibly unique to Australia and the Commonwealth. So other ANZAC parades, like the Canberra one, was you know, planned, constructed as a memorial parade, you know, with the statues and individual memorials all the way along it. But this ANZAC Parade here is organic. It has grown naturally out of, you know, from the history of European exploration, occupation, and use. And it includes all aspects of military life, from, you know, training through to post-war, you know, housing. And it's fundamental also to the LGA. That's it from me. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. Oh, this next one, that's a link. You can download the report that I submitted to council from that link there. Okay, thanks.
That's great, Sue. Thank you so much for that talk.